Yo, what's going on, guys? It's Houston Sports Talk back into the video today. And today I'm going to be talking about why I think the Texas Longhorns will beat the Alabama Crimson Tide in tomorrow's college football matchup. This is going to be one of the best matchups you will see throughout the season. Obviously, you have some great matchups down the road. You have Ohio State and Michigan and some other great matchups. But this should be a top 5 game once the season is said and done. I'm not even talking about, championship games. I'm not talking about Big 10, Big 12 championship games or SEC. None of them. I'm not talking about championship games. Not talking about college football playoffs games. Just the regular season. Once the regular season is done, I think this will be either top 5 or top 3 game that you see. This is going to be an unbelievable game between two really good teams. Texas ranked number 11, Alabama ranked number 3. These two teams faced off last year, and both teams look very different, this year compared to what they did last year. Texas last year had a lot of players that, have been drafted in the NFL draft last year in 2023, but so does Alabama. And we're going to go over some players that got drafted by both teams. So, Texas Longhorns, their run game was pivotal in their Alabama-Texas game in 2022. They went to Bijan Robinson in the pass and rush game a lot, and he got selected 8th overall to the Atlanta Falcons. Bijan's run buddy, Roschon Johnson, which was one of the best run duos in college football they called it Bijan and Roschon, or some people would call it Robinson and Johnson, and Roschon Johnson got selected in the 4th round to the Chicago Bears. So those two guys will be missing, who were really good in the Alabama-Texas game, will be out. They won't play at all this year. They're playing for NFL teams, but they are not playing for Texas when they did last year against Alabama. A big leader for this Texas defense from last season and seasons before was DeMarvion Overshown. He was drafted in the 5th round to the Dallas Cowboys, and sadly, DeMarvion Overshown did tear his ACL in the preseason for the Dallas Cowboys. Love DeMarvion Overshown. He was a great leader at that linebacker position, and when I heard that news that he tore his ACL in the preseason for the Dallas Cowboys, really hated hearing that news. That was really it for notable players that got drafted to Texas. But Alabama players that were drafted in the 2023 NFL Draft, it's just an unbelievable draft class for these Alabama Crimson Tide in the 2023 NFL Draft. Number 1 overall, you have Bryce Young, quarterback to the Carolina Panthers. He had an unbelievable season for Alabama last year as their starting quarterback. Then at number 3 overall to the Houston Texans, you have Will Anderson Jr., who was... He's like number 2 or number 3 in tackles for loss in Alabama history. And then another guy that got drafted, number 12 to the Detroit Lions, Jamar Gibbs, was a big part of this Alabama offense last year. Also, a defensive back, Jordan Battle, got drafted. Brian Branch was drafted in the 2nd round to the Detroit Lions. He was great for that secondary for Alabama last year, and he's going to be so good in the NFL. He had a pick 6 in his first game last night with the Detroit Lions in the NFL season kickoff against the Kansas City Chiefs. And there was another player named Henry To'oTo'o who was big for this Alabama defense as a starting linebacker and got drafted in the 4th round to the Houston Texans. So you got multiple players getting drafted to Houston and Detroit, with Brian Branch and Jamar Gibbs going to Detroit, and Will Anderson Jr. and Henry To'oTo'o going to Houston, and Bryce Young going to Carolina. So they have lost key players. Texas has lost key players, but both squads have added in great recruits. That's the thing about Alabama. Look how many players they've lost in the past years due to the draft, but they always bounce back because Nick Saban and Alabama are monsters in the recruiting program, and so are Texas. Both teams have improved. Jalen Monroe had a great game in his first game as the quarterback for Alabama, his first start as the Alabama's starting quarterback last week against Middle Tennessee, 56-7. He had 3 passing touchdowns with 2 rushing touchdowns. But this Texas team, I feel like they got better than they were last year. Yes, they lost Bijan and they lost Roschon, but I feel like their defense is better than it was last year, even though they lost DeMarvion Overshown in the draft. I think their offense is a little bit better. Their wide receiver, you have a better, I think Xavier Worthy, who is going to be a 1st-round pick in the 2024 NFL Draft, is better than he was in his sophomore season. I think he's going to be way better. He was already great last week in Texas's first game against Rice. I think another guy who was a little bit quiet against Rice last week for Texas was Jordan Whittington, who had a great year last year as a wide receiver for Texas. I think he'll be a lot more active in this Alabama game. Also, they added in someone who's a little bit familiar with playing Alabama, Adonai Mitchell, who I think is going to be a great wide receiver for this Texas offense, and he even had a really solid game against Rice last week as well. And, have a solid tight end as well. This defense is really solid. Quinn Ewers, I think he's going to be better than he was last year. First game, he was okay. He threw 3 touchdown passes. Quinn Ewers probably could have been better against a Rice team. But Texas is going to have to make some adjustments if they want to win this game against Alabama. But I do believe they will make those adjustments. They are nearly beat Alabama last year. I think one of the biggest differences is going to be this matchup against Alabama is, yes, Alabama's lost a lot of key players, but they've also added in a lot of key players to this team this year for their 2023 squad. But I think a big factor into this game is last year's game where Texas almost beat Alabama. That was a game where it was in Texas. Now they play in Alabama, and I think it's going to be harder to beat Alabama in Bama. But also want to mention that Quinn Ewers barely played last time. So Texas has their quarterback this time because Hudson Card was the quarterback for most of the game, for 3/4 of the football game against Alabama, because Quinn Ewers got hurt in that football game. So if Quinn Ewers fully healthy now against Alabama, which he played the first couple drives, first 2 or 3 drives last year, then got hurt. Then Hudson Card had to come in against a top team in Alabama and try to take them out, which he did really solid, and Texas almost won. And he did really good as Texas's quarterback, trying to push them through to get a victory over Alabama. I think that this year it's going to be different with having Quinn Ewers, having a solid running back group with Jonathan Brooks and their backup running back as well, and the wide receiver group being a little bit better with Xavier Worthy being, I think, better than he was last season. Same thing goes for Jordan Whittington as well, adding in a couple recruits at wide receiver with Adonai Mitchell and a couple other names as well. The defense getting better through the recruiting class this season as well. And then Alabama losing key players in this draft. I think the Texans are sorry, not the Texans. I've been used to talking about the Houston Texans for weeks, but I think these Texas Longhorns are due for a huge upset against Alabama after last year's loss. And I do believe Alabama will lose this game by a target of 3 to 6 points, and Texas will pull off a big upset. I don't think this will be a very high-scoring game. I think this will be in the 30s, but I think both teams will be over 30 points, which is high-scoring. But for 2 top 10 teams, Texas 11 and Alabama 3, you think it'd be a little bit more high-scoring. But with 2 good defenses for Alabama and Texas, it definitely could be another low-scoring ball game. I think Texas wins this one 37-34, but I wouldn't be surprised if you see another low-scoring game between Texas and Alabama. Maybe Texas can hold down quarterback Jalen Milroe like they did Bryce Young last year. Texas played some great defense last season against Bryce Young. Maybe they can do the same against Jalen Milroe. That's what I'm hoping happens. And with Quinn Ewers out there for the Longhorns, which he was not for most of the game last year, I think that could be a big factor for the Texas Longhorns. But I think the biggest factor from last year's game going into this year's is that this game is in Alabama. Last year's was in Texas. You had the home territory last year, and you lost by 3. But now you travel on the road. Yes, you're better than you were better than you were last year, and Alabama's probably gotten a little bit worse than they were last year, to be honest. Because they lost a lot of great players in Will Anderson Jr. and Bryce Young and Jamar Gibbs and Brian Branch and Henry Toto. So they've lost some key players, but they've also added in some good players in. But it wouldn't surprise me at all if Texas maybe loses this ball game by the area of 10 to 16 points. It just depends how they start off this ball game. They have to get off to a good start, a good tempo to start this ball game, because you cannot struggle early on against Alabama, because that will kill you. You have to start off good. You have to score on your first drive. Doesn't matter if that's a field goal or a touchdown. That's just how I feel. Preferably a touchdown your first drive, but score first on. If you get the ball first, field goal's fine, first possession, but score your first drive, preferably a touchdown, field goal's fine. And then once you score your first drive, you get the tempo going, and you got to keep matching the same energy that Alabama is going, because Alabama's not going to give up. Your defense has to play good, and your offense has to keep the tempo, because last week, I'm looking at the first half offense in this game for Texas, because last week against Rice, this Texas team was terrible on offense against Rice in the first half. They only scored 16 points in the first half last week against Rice. Ultimately finished the game with 37 points and 21 points in the third quarter. But 16 points in the first half against Rice, Texas needs to score a little bit more than that in the first half. Maybe around there, because if your defense is doing good, maybe 16 points against Alabama in the first half is fine, but there's a good chance that is not good enough. So this Texas offense needs to keep the tempo up, keep matching the energy with Alabama. They need good first half offense as well. Last week it was not so good offense in the first half and really good offense in the second half. And their defense needs to keep up with Alabama's offense. I think maybe there's a really good chance you could see Texas pull off an upset against Alabama. If Texas wins this game, I think they win this by 3. If Alabama wins this game, I think they're winning this game by the area of 9 to 15 points. That's it for the video, though. Hope you guys enjoyed. Let me know your thoughts, and let me know who you think is going to win tomorrow's matchup, the Texas Longhorns or the Alabama Crimson Tide. Peace out.